On June 7th, 1992, the temperature in Springfield, Missouri, began to rise early in the day. By 9 in the morning, the heat was already palpable as two individuals, Janelle Kirby and her male companion, arrived at 1717 East Delmer Street. According to statements later provided to law enforcement, their intent was to locate their friends, Suzanne Streeter and Stacy McCall, who had planned to spend the previous night at the residence. The home belonged to Cheryl Levitt, the 47-year-old mother of Suzanne Streeter. What began as a routine social call to gather for a planned excursion to a water park would eventually evolve into one of the most complex missing persons inquiries in the history of the region. To understand the context of the disappearance, investigators first had to reconstruct the movements of the three women over the preceding 24 hours. June 6th, 1992, marked the graduation ceremony for Kickapoo High School. Both Susan Streeter and Stacy McCall were graduates. Records indicate that the graduating class assembled at the Hammond Student Center in Springfield. Among the audience was Cheryl Levitt. Witness statements and photographs recovered later depicted a celebratory atmosphere with no indicators of distress or external threats noted during the ceremony itself. Following the conclusion of the formal event, the timeline fragmented as the individuals involved separated to attend various social gatherings. Cheryl Levitt was last seen leaving the graduation ceremony. Her subsequent movements were verified through a phone conversation. At approximately 23:15 hours, Levitt spoke with a friend regarding the refinishing of a chest of drawers. This conversation serves as the final verified contact with Levitt. According to the friend's statement, Levitt expressed fatigue and an intention to remain at her residence on East Delmer Street for the remainder of the night. She was alone in the house at that time. Meanwhile, Suzanne Streeter and Stacy McCall navigated a series of social engagements. Police reports state that the two young women, along with other graduates, initially gathered at a residence in Battlefield, Missouri. The original plan, according to multiple statements obtained from peers, involved the group traveling to a hotel in Branson for an overnight stay. However, logistical changes occurred due to overcrowding at the hotel location, and the plan was abandoned. The two women departed the Battlefield location in their separate vehicles and reconvened at a secondary gathering at a private residence in Springfield. It was during the early morning hours of June 7th that the final transit occurred. At approximately 0200 hours, the two young women left the secondary gathering. They drove in separate vehicles to the residence on East Delmer Street. This change in plans was a last-minute decision, a fact that investigators weighed heavily. It suggested that any individual targeting the women would not have had long-term knowledge of their location that specific night. A witness, identified as a friend of the women, reported speaking with them shortly after their departure, confirming their destination. The timeline places their arrival at the Delmer residence at approximately 02:15 hours. This estimation is based on the driving distance between the party location and the residence. Physical evidence at the location corroborated their arrival. Police noted that 3 vehicles were parked in the driveway: Cheryl Levitt's Chevrolet Corvette, Suzanne Streeter's Ford Escort, and Stacy McCall's Toyota Corolla. This configuration of vehicles indicated that all 3 individuals were present at the location simultaneously in the early hours of June 7th. The narrative of the incident shifts from movement to silence between the hours of 02:15 and 0900. There are no verified outgoing calls, no witness sightings, and no alarm triggers recorded during this window. One witness in the neighborhood later provided a statement regarding a vehicle seen in the area during these early morning hours. This witness described an older model van, potentially green or gray, distinct in appearance, driving slowly near the Levitt residence. However, the description was generic enough that matching it to a specific registration proved difficult. When Janelle Kirby and her companion arrived the following morning, the initial observations they made constitute the primary record of the location before formal investigation protocols were initiated. They noted the presence of the 3 vehicles, which suggested to the witnesses that the occupants were inside. However, upon approaching the front entrance, Kirby observed a disruption to the exterior fixture. The glass globe of the porch light was shattered, and shards of glass were scattered across the concrete steps. The light bulb itself was intact, but the protective globe was destroyed. In a sequence of events that would later complicate the forensic reconstruction of the timeline, Kirby attempted to clear the debris, unaware that the location would soon be designated as central to a major investigation. She swept the glass fragments to the side of the porch and discarded larger pieces into a trash can, inadvertently altering the state of the entry point. The front door was found to be unlocked. This detail was noted in the case file as significant, given Cheryl Levitt's known adherence to security routines. Friends and family interviewed during the subsequent inquiry consistently stated that Levitt was meticulous about locking doors and securing her home. Upon entering the residence, the witnesses encountered the family dog, a Yorkshire Terrier named Cinnamon, exhibiting signs of distress. The animal was agitated, a behavior that was inconsistent with its usual temperament. The interior of the house appeared undisturbed at first glance. There were no immediate signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, and no damage to the interior walls or fixtures. The investigation would later rely heavily on the placement of personal items to establish the theory that the three women were removed from the location against their will. The friends moved through the hallway to check the bedrooms. The beds appeared to have been used recently. The sheets were pulled back, indicating the individuals had retired for the evening. The bed in the master bedroom appeared to have been slept in. A book was placed on the nightstand, and Cheryl Levitt's glasses were folded nearby. This suggested she had been reading before going to sleep and was likely awakened or interrupted. In the bathroom, wet washcloths were found, indicating the younger women had prepared for sleep. Their clothing from the graduation festivities was folded neatly. Stacy McCall's shorts were found, but her shirt and underwear were missing. The police theorized that the women had changed into sleepwear. In the living room, investigators later documented the presence of 3 purses lined up in a row on the floor near the stairs. Cheryl Levitt's purse contained her money, identification, and credit cards. Stacy McCall's purse was also present, containing her medication and clothing. Suzanne Streeter's bag was accounted for as well. The presence of cigarettes belonging to Levitt and Streeter was a critical evidentiary point. Both women were described in witness statements as heavy smokers who would not voluntarily depart the residence without their tobacco. The timeline of discovery continued to unfold throughout the morning of June 7th. When the telephone in the residence rang, Kirby answered it. The caller was an unidentified male who made sexually explicit comments. This event occurred before law enforcement was notified. Another call was received shortly thereafter, which Kirby hung up on. These interactions were not immediately logged as evidence, and the specific time of the call was reconstructed later based on witness recollection. Around 10:30 in the morning, the mother of Stacy McCall, Janice McCall, arrived at the residence after failing to reach her daughter by telephone. Her observations corroborated the earlier findings. The cars were present, the purses were visible, and the television was still on, displaying static noise from a channel that had finished broadcasting for the night. In a significant procedural failure caused by the chaotic nature of the initial search by friends, the answering machine messages were accessed. Witnesses present prior to police arrival reported hearing a message on the machine that they described as strange or disjointed. However, in the process of listening to the tape, the message was inadvertently deleted. The contents of that message remain unknown, representing a permanent gap in the evidentiary record. By the afternoon, records indicate that Janice McCall contacted the Springfield Police Department to report the 3 women missing. The official police report was filed later that day. marking the transition from a private search to a formal inquiry. Officer Rick Bookout was the first to respond to the scene. His initial report noted the arrangement of the purses and the presence of the vehicles. He observed the shattered porch light, but due to the earlier cleaning by the witnesses, could not determine the trajectory of the impact that broke the globe. As the police began their preliminary assessment on the evening of June 7th, they were faced with a contaminated location. Between the initial discovery by Kirby at 0900 hours and the arrival of law enforcement in the late afternoon, nearly 20 people had entered and exited the house. Friends, family members, and concerned neighbors had walked through the rooms, touched surfaces, and used the telephone. This lack of initial containment severely compromised the potential for recovering fingerprints or trace evidence. The police report noted the absence of any note or communication, indicating a voluntary departure. The vehicle keys were still inside the house. The dog, which had been left alone for nearly 12 hours by the time police secured the location, provided no leads. Neighbors were canvassed to determine if any barking had been heard during the critical window between 02:15 and 0800 hours. One neighbor reported hearing a simple, metallic sound during the night, similar to a car door closing, but observed nothing unusual. Within 48 hours, the case was reclassified from a missing persons report to a criminal investigation involving possible foul play. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was contacted to assist. The initial days were consumed by the process of eliminating false leads and trying to reverse the damage done by the contamination of the residents. Investigators utilized luminol to check for the presence of biological material that might have been cleaned up, but the results were negative. The house was processed for latent prints, but the volume of prints belonging to the visitors on June 7th made isolation of a suspect's prints nearly impossible. The investigation scrutinized the personal lives of the three women for any potential threats. Cheryl Levitt was a hairdresser at a local salon. Financial records and personal correspondence were analyzed, but no immediate red flags or debts were identified. Suzanne Streeter and Stacy McCall were young adults with no criminal history. The random nature of the disappearance, combined with the lack of distinct forensic evidence at the point of extraction, presented a complex challenge for the Springfield Police Department. The focus shifted to individuals known to the women and those in the surrounding area. One subject of interest was Robert Cox, a man with a prior criminal record who was working in the Springfield area at the time. Police interviews with Cox established that he had been living near the area. Cox provided an alibi, stating he was with his girlfriend the night of the disappearance. Initially, the girlfriend corroborated this account. However, she later retracted her statement, claiming Cox had asked her to lie. Despite this discrepancy, investigators lacked physical evidence linking Cox to the residence at East Delmer. No fingerprints, hair, or fibers connecting him to the scene were recovered. Another individual examined was Cheryl Levitt's ex-boyfriend. Police noted a volatile history, but he was cleared after providing a substantiated alibi and passing a polygraph examination. The investigation faced significant challenges due to the lack of a primary location where the individuals were taken. Without a secondary location, investigators were limited to the residence on East Delmer. The theory developed by detectives suggested that the removal of the women was controlled and coerced, likely involving a weapon or the threat of immediate harm, to maintain silence and compliance. Given the close proximity of neighbors, months into the investigation, a tip was received regarding a parking garage at Cox South Hospital. A caller suggested that the concrete in the garage, which had been poured shortly after the disappearance, might contain what was later recovered in other cases. Technicians used ground-penetrating radar to scan the area. The scan revealed 3 anomalies consistent with the size and shape of individuals. However, the site was not excavated. Procedural disagreements and the lack of a warrant based on the radar data alone prevented the breaking of the concrete. Engineering reports and police officials expressed skepticism, noting that the depth and the construction timeline did not align perfectly with the disappearance. A core sample was eventually taken, but it did not yield conclusive biological markers. In 1993, the case was featured on national television, generating over 5,000 tips. Each credible tip was logged and assigned to a detective. One tip led to a search of a farm in Webster County. Investigators spent weeks sifting through soil and debris. While items were cataloged, none belonged to Levitt, Streeter, or McCall. The doctrine of evidence in the Springfield Three case is defined by what is absent rather than what is present. There are no ballistics reports. There are no biological samples indicating injury within the home. The timeline halts abruptly at 02:15 hours. The inquiry established that 3 adult women vanished from a secure residence in a densely populated residential neighborhood, without a single neighbor reporting a scream or the sound of a struggle. The silence of the event stands in stark contrast to the physical reality that 3 individuals were forcibly removed from their environment. By the end of the first week, the timeline had been solidified. The women entered the house at approximately 02:15. They prepared for bed. Sometime between that arrival and the sunrise at 05:30, an event occurred that removed them from the premises. The investigation then turned outward, looking for connections to other incidents in the region, examining the records of known offenders, and sifting through thousands of tips that began to pour in as the media coverage expanded. But the house on East Delmer remained the central, silent witness, holding secrets that were obscured by the foot traffic of well-meaning friends on that Sunday morning. To date, the file remains open. The status of Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall is classified as missing. The legal system eventually moved to declare the women deceased in absentia for estate purposes, a purely administrative function that did not close the criminal file. The investigation continues to rely on the re-examination of witness statements from 1992, looking for inconsistencies that might have been overlooked during the initial processing of the case. The personal effects inside the home remained largely untouched during the initial phase, a snapshot of interrupted lives. The graduation dresses hung in the closet. The makeup remained on the counter. The dog waited. The silence that settled over 1717 East Delmer was total.